Hello, thanks for tuning in again. So before I say something and give context for this video, a couple housekeeping things is uh, the Circling Institute, my company, the courses that we do and all the gatherings that we do, given the coronavirus, we've taken everything online. So it's an opportunity for those of you that haven't been able to make it out to San Francisco to in person can now join us and come circling online. So the info is below. You can look at our Facebook page or the website, the Circling Institute, links below. If you're interested in working one-on-one with me in coaching, email me, links below. Okay, so originally, Chris and I were going to continue our Platonic Dialogos series, where we go through and we're just going to read through all of the Platonic dialogues and talk about it and be in the process of it. Well, it didn't quite go that way. We ended up actually debriefing and creating a kind of postscript to the Dialogos of the four-way conversation that I just put out a couple days ago with John Vervaeke, Jordan Hall, Chris, and I. And it was really quite interesting we really found that the fireside, the campfire gathering symbol just kept gathering more and more and more and more. We found ourselves inside of it, debriefing that last conversation, and then in some senses kind of going beyond it and housing it. It was really generative. I think I haven't watched it yet, but I would imagine you kind of feel the energy of kind of the intelligence of it speaking through us and us realizing it and having just like lots of ideas, lots of coherence. And a couple times where it kind of fell off and got back on, but then it kept weaving it back into the metaphor of the fireside. And so we just, about an hour after that, I ran out of time. But I wanted to post this as a postscript to that conversation. So enjoy.
Even a little bit further back.
Yes.
Because we were talking about it as something already going. But really, actually, the process is much more like building the fire and then being witness to it catching and then redirecting the loving attention to the place where it catches and then feeding into that place.
Right.
And that's why the beginning, there's a sort of a beautiful awkwardness sometimes to the beginning of those conversations, because it's like trying to lay the kindling, to lay the faggots, to lay the wood, so that at some point, nobody knows where the spark is actually going to come from, really. But it will come if the fire is laid, lovingly. Yeah. And of course it is. And so it catches.
Totally. And there's that sense of faith, I think.
Yeah.
What do you think would have happened? I really like this metaphor, right, of the fire.
It's beautiful.
But what do you think would have happened if we just kind of like go through that whole conversation again? Just imagine it, and we had that metaphor of like, oh, we're gathering the wood right now, and this is what it's like to gather the wood and light it up, and like, I wonder what that whole, if you just kind of replayed it of like, we had that frame or that symbol to look through. When you imagine it, what do you see?
When I look through that symbol
of like, oh, that beginning where it's like a little bit awkward and like, oh, you're like, oh, it's discoordinated. And if we knew this is the part where we're gathering the wood and we're setting everything up.
Yes. Well, I think that understanding it with that metaphoric language actually helps to foster the faith in the dialogue. I mean, I'm already obviously disposed to have faith in the dialogue because of its participants and because we've done it before.
Yeah.
But I think in moments, if only in those brief moments where the faith begins to flag somewhat, or stalls a little bit or lapses into some form of uncertainty, then the metaphor of the language actually bears the faith out. Yeah. Because you understand the role of that particular moment of process in the masterpiece of the overall process. I know that what we're doing now has meaning not for its own sake, but for what it will then lay and avail for further down this road. Yeah. Right. So that, moments of shifting or moments of trying to, the moments of trying to, the sort of moments of the shuffling at the beginning is all in service of laying the proper fire. So I think that's what the metaphor does for me. It's you put your finger on it beautifully. It's the fostering of faith. Yeah. It's the fostering of faith. If we take the time carefully to lay the fire, to lay its conditions, and the spark will catch.
Which we see through with faith. So my awkwardness, right? It's like an awkwardness or a disheveledness or a wondering, and then we just go, this is that part in which we're awkward and we're wondering and we're off balance, and this is the part. There's something about that connects that and makes it transparent in somehow the end becomes present, right?
Yes, exactly. Yeah. Exactly. The fire becomes present before it ignites. The fire becomes present before it ignites. Yeah. And I mean, if we wanted to strain the metaphor with a little bit more specificity, we could almost say that like each piece of kindling is a particular proposition if we wanted to fold it into the typology of knowing. Okay. That might be something actually we might want to think about doing with this metaphor, is to see how it can perfuse the typology of knowing, because then each bit of kindling, each piece of wood, whatnot, that you lay on the fire is a proposition that's meant to help to foster the conditions for the process that will ultimately kindle.
Wait a minute, did you just put a piece of kindling in the fire just now? Because I had that feeling of something got lit up.
So perhaps the claim was also an enactment of the process that it was trying to describe. I should be so lucky. There's something. This is interesting, Guy. We didn't talk about this the other day, but there's something to this.
There's something about that moment, that particular moment, right, where this realization of like the very thing that I'm talking about becomes the thing that's actually happening or talking.
Yep.
That there's something about dialogos that I think is where topic, person talking, right, become the same thing.
Yep.
But there's also this element of where it's the dialogos, you find yourself of it and in it.
Yes.
You don't create it.
Yes. You fall into stride with it.
Yeah.
You start to properly trace its motions. Your motions become its motions because you've fallen almost into its gravitation. Right. Yes. Your motion, it's like the origin of motion converts. The motion is not of you, it's not of your own motility, as it were, if I can use that metaphor. It's that you're enacted by emotion that you've now, whose train you have now stepped into.
Yes. See, this is what I'm.
And so your motion and its motion become identical because all of a sudden they share the same nature. And that's that affinity of antiquity, right? That's what I think that the Neoplatonists are trying to talk about, right? The motion of the spheres, being in train with the motion of the spheres, as it were.
Yeah. It's also, I'm not exactly sure where this fits, but I've been trying to integrate this Aristotle reading I did about, at least from this author. It was a Heideggerian. It was like reading Aristotle through Heidegger, right? Basically. And This author really, he highlighted how, and I'm probably going to do a whole lot of damage to this, so let this thing just burn in the fire. Right? But like, my understanding is of a lot of what moved Aristotle to write was this tension that was left open between, I think with Parmenides, between up until that point,
Parmenides?
yeah, where
Okay.
being is that which doesn't change,
Mm.
and non-being is that which changes or moves. And Aristotle is saying like, no, there's a tension there, that there's no not being if it moves or changes, and there's no being that which endures or stays the same. And where he went at it from is he had to show how movement wasn't just ontic, but it was ontological. Movement was a part of, is it ousia, right? This kind of whooshing up as not a thing that moves, but a feature of a feature of being itself, right? And I'm just kind of getting the sense of like being, well, when you were talking about moving, right? Like I'm moving, and that which moves is moving me. I recognize we're both being moved by what was moved.
Right.
But that sense of like that sense of like that, yeah, movement and change is being, right? The way that being, it's in some level, and if I remember right, for Aristotle, it was like, well, how do you show that movement is an ontological structure, right?
That fits. No, that seems to fit, because then I think
don't know how, but yeah, you're right.
I think for Aristotle, the movement is always a movement to the telos of the nature intrinsic to a particular thing, right? Or to the category of a particular thing. Everything moves in the direction of its implicit nature.
Yes.
Almost in a gravitational way, right? The things that fall to Earth because they are of Earth. They belong on Earth, as it were. And so then the movement of all things is a movement it's a telic movement.
Yes.
Which explains how the movement is of being ultimately, and not.
So even picking up, is it fair to say that even picking up the wood or the propositions to make the fire is already being given by the telos, which isn't here, that when we light the fire, we find ourselves. I'm just kind of getting this sense of, I really like this, what you said about like the fire of Dialogos. There's the setting up the fire, there's putting the rocks around, there's gathering the wood, and then there's putting the wood being the propositions upon which we set into this new, we enact into different levels of knowing.
Yes. And the idea that the propositional situating of the Dialogos by the laying of the wood as the kindling is connected ultimately to the participatory enactment of its embers, of its actual sparking, and that the thing that connects the laying of the propositions, the building of the fire, to the ultimate enactment of its flame is faith. That's like, you pinning that on that particular term is perfect.
Right.
Because what that means in a way is that this is actually kind of not new in that it was implicit before, but new in the sense, I think, that you've made it explicit, Guy.
Right.
But perhaps what is actually the thing, the disposition of engagement, the interesse that opens continuity between the ways of knowing, is in fact faith.
Yeah. Okay, say that again. So like the disposition
of interesse, right? The being involved in, the immersion into.
Right.
that opens continuity and the cascading transmutation of one way of knowing down into the other, right? So to go from propositional knowing into the grounding propositional knowing down back into participatory knowing, that the grounding of one way of knowing in its more primordial antecedent way of knowing, that the disposition that actually enables and fosters the orientation from the first to the fourth way of knowing is actually the disposition of faith.
Yeah.
And I'd never thought of faith in those terms before, that the faith, that the reason that you build the fire is because you have faith in the building of the fire.
Yeah.
That the building of the fire will culminate in the kindling of the flame. And that's a beautiful way of thinking about the process. Because we kept talking the other day about, how beautiful the flame is when it's cultivated, how it changes our relationship to the phenomenology and the ontology of the world, right? What it does to our relationship with being once ignited. But we actually didn't talk about, although perhaps performed, the process of actually building it from the ground up.
Yes, yes.
And that deserves just as much, if not more, attention, because, we can all appreciate, we are all galvanized by a beautiful fire, right? A good fire is appreciable to almost universally appreciable, right? We have no problem appreciating the beauty of a good fire, but we do have difficulty with actually producing it. Yes. Or participating in its production. Right. And that's where the faith comes in.
Right. And the fire, so one of the things interesting.
And then the whole metaphor is about the divine spark, the pneuma and the conscience, and like all of those, and then all of those abundant theological metaphors and philosophic metaphors of antiquity involving flame, involving the relationships between flame and spiritus and faith, all start to pour into this campfire now. Because now it's host to a world of spiritual analogies.
Right. And in some way, that flame, as it burns, and you know this, if you've made campfires, right? Especially if you had to work for it. Like if you had to chop the wood, do all that stuff, right? And you light it, and there is this interesting quality where it's really clear, because if you've ever tried to light a fire when it's been windy or something, right? Like, or if
it's
you have
brutal.
Sure. So you're really clear that it takes at least divine divinities to work with you. You can't make it lit. Yeah. So there's a quality of like grace, of like
yes,
comes, right?
The harnessing of the elements, like the surfing metaphor.
Yeah, but part of what glows, because the fire that you chopped the wood for, right? Versus the fire that just, I don't know, you bought the lumber at Kmart or something, right? Like, and you put gas on it, and right? Versus you chopped the wood and you did all the work, and like you brought it up there, and then it lights up. Part of the beauty that shines through is the whole thing as grace, including your labor, including your sacrifices, including the death of your most prized propositions as they burn up in flames, including the identity in which is being lived.
And then here's what I also love. You said something just earlier about the fact that, if the proposition turns out to be defunct, or the proposition turns out not to be as operable, you'll throw it into the fire and it'll just burn there. And what's interesting about the metaphor can actually devour that situation as well. In both literally and figuratively, because what happens is, let's say, a proposition the relief of a proposition will often only be distinct and discernible after the fact of its use. So if you throw a proposition into the fire and that proposition actually doesn't catch or ignite at the moment of its offering, what is likely to happen is that when the fire does catch, when the dialogic process truly kindles and takes over and takes on the life of its own, it will retroactively illume all of those propositions that came before it that could not manage to ignite it at the time of their offering. So in other words, the bit of kindling that you threw into the fire that didn't catch before, once other pieces have caught, it too inevitably will also be engulfed by them.
Right. Interesting. Wow, this is really like, I mean, just getting the sense of this fire as a symbol.
It's powerful.
It really is gathering everything. When you said,
oh my God.
When you said like, even like our symbol even hosts this, it even includes the lack of this or that.
Yeah.
Like, you can feel it. You can feel it gathering in. And there's something is about like a fire that's like, especially one that's flaming hot, you can feel it sucking things in and then combusting it, right? That whole thing.
Yes, exactly. And the other thing that's also kind of beautiful about it is that I'm thinking of that equidistance. We were talking in our four-way conversation, we were talking about the importance of the equidistance of the individuals to and from the fire. And I mean, what happens when someone gets too close to it as well, right? I mean, it's almost a reflection that deters. There's something about the dynamic of the process that actually deters the narcissistic impulse. Because if you get too close to the fire, right? John was bringing up those examples, or I can't remember if it was that in that or another conversation recently, was bringing up those examples, those mythic examples, right? The Icarus examples of those who get too close to the source, of their vitality. Yeah. And if someone gets too close to the fire, obviously, that's damaging. It's damaging potentially to the fire. It's damaging also to the individual, and it's damaging to the overall dynamic of the communal that's gathered around it. So that also feeds into the aptness of that metaphor, because the equidistance is not an incidental feature of the process. It is a necessary feature of the process. You cannot be too far away from the fire or too close to the fire. Its figuration actually prescribes the orientation and configuration around it. The figuration of the fire prescribes its configuration, right? Everyone has to be situated in such a way as to optimize it and optimize its effect on them and their relationship to and through it, with and to one another. Wow. Boy, this maybe it should have been obvious because of its perennial use in our mythos, but this symbol is remarkably exemplary of Dialogos in ways that we have even yet to discover, I think, or qualify.
Based on to what degree it's burned and just everything that is gathered just now and just talking about it. Yeah. It's like, we haven't even touched this ensemble has got that kind of quality to it.
Yeah. Well, then then there is the property of inexhaustibility.
Yeah.
Right?
Right.
We haven't even gotten to it yet, right?
Yeah.
There's this beautiful the inexhaustible eternality of it, right? That even when we think we have exhausted it, its eternity has yet to begin.
Yes.
Right? Which is a great way of thinking about its inexhaustibility.
That's the one place. Yes, realizing its inexhaustibility. I am anything but exhausted.
Right.
Right. Like. Its inexhaustibility, it's this quality of like, that's something about it where I think I'm wondering if this is what John was highlighting or shining about, because one of the things in that conversation, he was like, well, okay, well, what is it that if Dialogos could be a way of being in life, right? This kind of Socratic faith, what is it how can we exemplify it in a way that actually has it be something that people will just find themselves doing because by virtue of being drawn towards it. And my recollection is that's when the inquiry about beauty started to happen, right?
Yes, that's right.
And there's beauty, like, so my experience of just kind of coming to this is it's beautiful.
Yes,
right?
exactly. And that the beauty and the functionality are actually inseparable, because a beautiful fire is also a working fire, and a working fire is also a beautiful fire.
Totally. And functionality and beauty can become symbiotic, like can mutually disclose and enhance and participate with one another. That's like the opposite of those business meetings we were talking about.
Oh yeah, it's
right?
Precisely the inverse of those business meetings you were talking about. Those business meetings that endeavor to kind of like the narcissistic impulse that endeavor to come to a point, right? The idolatrous impulse that endeavors to come to a point, to achieve its closure to a point. And there is a place for that, of course. There is some situations in which we do need that functionally, but this is exactly the opposite. This opens out. It opens out.
And in terms of the functionality, right? So basically, well, what has us bothered chopping wood, right? And setting up the stones and finding the right place, which is also really interesting.
Oh, finding the right place. Yeah. Say more about that.
Well, what's interesting is it's got to be in a clearing. You can't like make your fire in the dense jungle, like surrounded by a bunch of things that you can't see. It's actually in the clearing that the fire right? Because the sparks go up and you.
Oh yeah. Right?
And I'm just, of course, you can kind of hear this a phrase around it, which is like Heidegger's notion of, the way that he talks about thinking as, he doesn't have views. Like he's gone on like trails in the forest and meanderings of thought, following it and not knowing where it's going. And then there's these moments that are almost like by grace, where the thickness of the forest all of a sudden opens up into the clearing, right?
Yes.
What's interesting about
like the shaman who works his way through the narrow tunnel only to open back out into the sunlight and has that gestalt shift in perspective that reopens the world.
Totally.
Right? The enclosure and its opening.
Right.
Which is such a primordial motif for mimesis.
Right. And it's like the sense I know in Heidegger speak, in a sense, a sign being there is precisely we are a thrown openness clearing, right? That gathers, like you could say that, like I get the sense of just like with the sunset, right?
Right.
The sunset, it requires my constraints, my limitations, my finitude. Right?
Yes.
But in that sense, it becomes a clearing of the what would otherwise be a self-transparent or self-opaque, either way, dominance of itself, totally opaque. But then we're born in a little perspective, and then the whole all that shows up as cosmos. Right?
Yeah.
Right. And then that there's something about
ungatherable
precisely
cosmos.
Our death, right?
Yes. Oh, that's good. And so then that feeds again back into and through the opening of the metaphor, because part of the building of the fire, the cultivation of the fire, of the campfire, is constrained by the givenness of the environment, right? You can choose your place within, but still within certain constraints, right? You cannot decide to go and build a fire anywhere in the world, as it were. Right. You have to build, right? The fire is still located within the givenness of the constraints that your actuality has provided.
Yeah.
And so the cultivation of the fire has to take place and be drawn from the wellspring that is available to you by your thrownness, as it were.
Yeah. Now it's like, if we think about this, so there's that, in Being in Time, where he talks about the two modes of being there, or human being, right? Mm-hmm. It's authentic and inauthentic. And I think it's something like, and this is very difficult. I keep thinking I understand this, and then it slips away. So it's one of those things that seems to be one of those infinite horizons of continually realizing that it's inexhaustible. But this sense of like, well, okay, the inauthentic mode of the clearing is when the clearing does not take itself as a clearing or an openness for the world to occur, right? Or show or shine forth as phenomena, but instead it's the perpetuation of idle talk and inauthenticity, which is to see myself as one of the things amongst other things in the world that then acts in its actuality, not realizing that like even its inauthenticity is given by this primordial sense of our finitude that we bring, or the clearing that we bring. We cover it over by not seeing it, but demonstrating it, being the clearing that demonstrates me being, like the person trying to prove himself and gossiping.
Yes.
And just keeping the ball rolling. So it's interesting if we say that, like, okay, one way that we can look at this is we look at Dialogos, is it's almost like it's I don't even know if it's opposite, but it's totally other than idle talk.
Yes.
It's like, what is the difference between like the fire and building it and the Dialogos, right? And then what would be what is idle talk? What is the chit chat? What is even like that sense of just keeping things going?
Yes.
Like I'm wondering about like, if we look at if that's useful or fruitful. Is it different wood that you burn? Is it right? Is it the smoke? Is it the...
Yes. So perhaps,
I love just throwing something over there and then just seeing what happens.
Yes.
Threw that log in the fire.
Yes. Well, that's the thing. We're gathering ourselves to it, even as we're trying to describe what it is that we're gathering to. And so okay, let's try and then really, really, really dig ourselves then into the body of the metaphor. So, in some sense, perhaps any stick of wood could potentially serve as kindling for a dialogic process, even if begun idly. Because sometimes, if you think about it, sometimes so-called idle chatter does in fact transmute itself into dialogos, right? Conversations that seem banal at their outset can at times suddenly kindle. It does happen. To the great surprise of their participants, sometimes idle conversations can suddenly reveal a dialogic spirit and be possessed by that dialogic spirit, unbeknownst to and unwitting to the people who have sort of laid the conditions for it.
Yes.
But there is, I think, a dichotomy to be drawn, perhaps, between the willfully cultivated, or willfully, let's leave will out of it for a second, the knowingly cultivated dialogos, and the unknowingly cultivated dialogos. And that could be something like, this is a bit crude in the sense of it's sort of a blunt way to treat the metaphor, but it could be the difference between a well-chosen stick of wood and an inattentively chosen stick of wood, right? People who know how to build fires know what kinds of wood to use. And the uninitiated tend to just pick any stick up off the ground and think that it's going to catch, right? But of course, people who are practiced at building a fire know that you need a certain kind of wood. It needs to be
Mhm.
dry, certain sizes are good. You need to layer it in certain ways so that there's an accidental or unlooked to potential implicit in dialogue, that it can erupt unexpectedly, even from sticks of wood that aren't well suited to it.
Yeah.
Accidental successes are very motivational, because accidental successes actually encourage people who have produced something by accident to seek out the thing that they produced by accident, but to seek it out more knowingly. Dialogos is perfect, fits into that metaphor, right? If you think about it, because I think in our very first conversation, we were talking about this, that conversations, like going, back some months, our very first conversation, some conversations have marked meaningfulness in life in a way that few other things can or do. And in many cases, I know for me, those conversations that have ended up erupting into dialogic flame have not erupted into dialogic flame because we were building a dialogic fire.
Yeah.
They just happened because we were throwing sticks of wood into a pit, and at some point it caught. But the fact that it caught was the beginning of the revelation of Dialogos and what Dialogos can be and do. And so then we return to it more and more purposefully thereafter, knowing how transformational it can become. And so I guess getting back to your question about, sort of the difference between the idle chatter and the purposefully dialogic chatter, maybe it's simply a matter of like, even idle, idle chatter. I don't think idle chatter is as I don't feel as unkind toward idle chatter as I know some people do, because I think even idle chatter can accidentally foster the conditions of intimate relating.
Yes.
Even when we're not conscious of the intent to do so.
Totally.
It's almost a difference of kind in the purposefulness, but it's a difference of degree in its potential to offer the kindling.
Right.
If that makes any sense. I'm not even,
Yes. Well, it's interesting. I mean, this is the tricky part, right? And this is hard to grasp. You have to kind of think ontologically about this, but it's not like authenticity, good, inauthenticity, bad. No, it's like,
right.
If it wasn't for idle talk and inauthenticity, take out the value judgment on that. Authenticity is like, well, it's going on in your head. If you sit down and try to quiet your mind, all the thoughts that you don't notice that you're having, that when you notice you let them go, well, what is that on some level? Like, one way of thinking about that, well, that's the culture and the cultural practices keeping themselves going, right?
Right.
Like, if there wasn't gossip and all these kind of things built in, that and there is that sense of like, there's something actually quite exquisite and kind of deep about like, hello, how you doing? I'm doing fine.
Yeah.
In other words, the automaticity of it is also a propulsion of it, right?
Yes.
But at some point, that which is automatic now, at one point was probably a fire a long time ago, like was a spark that then,
right.
But then, okay, let's just look at that. So it's like, let's look at that. So it's like, that's the spark that then became an idea, an insight that went into action, that then created norms around it, and then structures and built in, and then the very spark and the norm became like, you can no longer feel the flame, but they're like what we sit on top of to put fire in the wood, right?
Yeah. That's right.
So what probably is something like that. I'm wondering if this is like working within what we're talking about. That, okay, so
that's like the basic cultural affordance.
Yeah.
For Dialogos,
something
all
like
of that
this.
machinery, unthinking machineries, the basic cultural apparatus that allows us to even contemplate the possibility of such a thing.
Exactly. I think about it. It's like the vine or the foliage that kind of comes and weaves itself together unknowingly to itself. Really, it's kind of automatic, but deeply intelligent. And then authenticity is something like the sprout out of nowhere, something.
Yes, the flowering.
And it blossoms.
The
And
efflorescence.
then it comes back down and disrupts this.
Yeah,
right? It integrates it. And then that thing down here becomes part of the, right? That's why it's difficult to say like,
That's okay. This is cool. So then the authentic cultivation in some sense rests upon sort of a primordial, sort of an inauthentic or an unconscious primordial affordance in the form of the cultural systems that we have functioning as our givenness. Yeah. Something like that.
Yes. And I'm wondering about, like, I think part of the thing of what's kind of authentic is this paradox of the flame, right? Like, I think on some level, there's always this experience when the flame lights. There's this experience of like, it was already there. That part of its profundity is the light by which I just saw was the light that lit.
Yes.
Right. And it disclosed it. So inauthenticity is the disclosure or the withdrawal of the fire. So on some level, it's like you and I are talking and we're lit by the fire and we're completely of everything that we see, but there is no sense of the realization that it's the fire that's lighting us. It's by means of the logos that any of this is at all. And I use the light. I eat with the light. I see with the light. We speak with the light. But I think it's on some level that the light discloses as it reveals. So something like where it erupts would be something like where at some point somebody goes, wait a minute. How the hell did we, like, what is it that's lighting all of this?
Right.
And there's it's because I think that there's that quality of inauthenticity has to do with the forgetfulness or the concealment.
Right. And so the remembrance and revelation of the sort of the fluorescence cast by the light of that logos is something. Yeah.
Whereas Plato talks about like all knowledge is remembering, like that quality of like that we don't have new, like that sense of like we don't have new ideas, and phenomenologically really experientially makes sense. When there's an insight, it doesn't feel like I discovered something new. It's actually the sense of like, oh yeah, it's like, oh yeah,
the unconcealment,
that thing that like the backing into. I can think of what Socrates is all about, backing into,
right.
See.
Right.
Yes.
And so it's the realization of remembrance that also entails the realization of your prior forgetfulness.
Right.
In the light of that emerging logos.
Totally.
That constitutes the countenance of authenticity.
Yes.
Where you can see that the lineaments of the world as they present to you are owed to sort of the burgeoning luminosity, which is not sudden in its nature, but sudden in your remembrance.
Exactly.
Yes.
Exactly. In fact, in your remembrance, you realize like, oh, it's been working the whole time. In fact, it knew with this it was coming, and you have this gratitude for a process that's been unfolding that didn't need your recognition, but clearly had an intelligibility on its own. And that's that experience of trust and faith that opens up in those moments of insight. Right. And so here's the thing I'm wondering about, and it's to see if this kind of weaves this in here. Like, so this thing about like this difference between, I really appreciate what you're saying is yeah, like, let's not discredit idle talk and chit chat and social norms. And like, there's something really deep there, because some of the best dialogos have been the ones that have just erupted within that, right?
Totally.
And so if we look at the ones that we actually build the fire for, and we construct, and we consciously bring in the wood, and we go through the awkwardness and the difficulty, and then we do that, right? So the difference between the two, but also the connection between the two. So this is an experience I was reminded of. I'm working with clients, and I think I've come to, and I've just, some recent experiences with some clients that have been really, really particularly profound. That have just reminded me of this, right? I think it's remind me of this. Is I have to say, the craziest thing, right? I think for people, the most amount of suffering is if you're sane, deeply sane, right? And your parents are crazy, and then everyone else around you is crazy, right? But you're the sane one. But then because you're around everybody that's crazy, your sanity actually is a self-evident sense of like, this is like valid and intelligent. Yet everyone around it, all they can do is mirror back like, that's wrong. And there's this whole experience of like having to go completely against this innate intelligibility. There's so many double binds and acrobats. And for whatever reason, I've noticed that a lot, that the people who have had the most weirdest double bind sufferings and contortions in their lives and struggles, actually when we start to uncover everything, they realize like, oh my God, my mom was like a schizophrenic and my dad was like a narcissist, and they used to torture me. And I just got used to that. And I could see, like, I could actually, I had a sane response, but I had no agreement. My life did not reflect my sanity. My sanity got a reflection of that I'm insane. And that, and really intelligent people kind of going through that, beautiful people. But then to watch them, so in particular, like, I'll be working with them, and then they'll have this experience where I'll be just like, they'll have this experience of being seen.
For the first time, I'm sure, for some.
Yeah, totally. Like, actually, I remember one time, this guy had a crazy mother. But most of the time, our parenting usually happens within the household, so no one really sees it. It was obvious that his mom was crazy, right? Like abusive and all this kind of stuff. And then we had her in for a session, and she was predictably crazy. And we're walking away, and she went home, and I was walking him back to his car, and he was like, that was crazy, right? And I'm like, kind of goes without saying. It's like, yeah, that was really intense. And I just imagine what it must have been like to grow up in that. He's like, well, wait a minute. No, you saw that thing that she did when she like spun her head around 3 times. And crazy.
That was real, right? Yeah.
I'm like, from my point of view, it's pretty crazy.
Yeah.
And there's this experience of, right? Because that very experience of her used to get him more and more in trouble, right? And in that moment, there's shared reality about like, no, that's really true.
Yeah.
And then from that point on, he started to notice more moments in his life that glowed reality, right? And so like this experience of being seen, deeply seen, on one level, usually there's this confusion because it's tied up with like guy's really, really great, or the therapist's really great, or the counselor's really great, right? And they may be, but it's like, it's not, they don't recognize like, actually this is just simply the experience of them being seen. And and the light that's actually reflected is actually shown back as it is on some level, right? And then they have that experience, and I've watched this over and over again, where they have this experience, and then they start, all the places that light up like that, they can start to see it. And then they start to gravitate towards that. And they start to have friends that then see, and they start to restore what has always been sane but unrequited.
Right.
And I'm wondering about like that sense of, but until that connection's made, of like where that guy was like, that was crazy, right? I'm like, yeah.
Yeah.
Like, whoa. Like it just
Yeah, because then all of a sudden through you, he was able to encircle himself into a perspective.
Yeah, exactly.
Yes.
And then
he was able to encircle himself and his family together into a perspective because he had you beholding it,
right.
and he could proximate himself in the carriage of your understanding. And that's not something obviously they had at his disposal before.
Yes, exactly.
Right. Oh my God, what a profound experience that must have been for him.
And I'm wondering about like this, okay, there's these fires, back to the fire, right? There's the carefully lit ones. We come together, we take our property, and it's a ritualistic sense of it, where this is, it's like what calls us forward is the future, or the telos of the fire itself. And then there's the erupting. See, I'm wondering about if something like those intentional fires, or something like the experience of, no, that was crazy, right? Yes, that was. Right? This experience of where we gather that intensely, and we experience it on purpose, that there's something about having that experience that makes us be able to like recognize the source of that which is lighting, the intelligibility which lights everything in these moments, and we become more apt to be prone for visits from Socrates, we'll say.
Right. That's right. And so when someone comes along like you did in this situation, and shows, and it might take only a couple of strokes to rearrange that, fire in a way that it might be, better ignited, or more reliably ignited. But all it does is it takes someone to come in and to adjust the craft for you, or to show you the craft in such a way that then you're able to actually reproduce something that only erupts spontaneously when it lacks the training, when it lacks the attention.
Yes. Here's that part of the fire where I have to go pee.
That's an important part of every fire.
Absolutely.
You always have to stray away from it into the darkness and come back.
Thank you for lighting the darkness in such a way that it becomes. I'll be able.
Thank you. Thank you.
Hang on 1 second.
This campfire metaphor is really becoming so much so that I think it's. I don't know. I think we'll need to take it with us, and we'll need to think about how the metaphor itself can be used to beautify the process that we're partaking of.
Yeah.
You know, that, like, I love the fact that you used it as the thumbnail for the conversation the other day. I almost think that it, like, I don't know. I almost think that it's something that can come to represent these projects that we're undertaking almost in a more formal way.
Yeah.
And I know, I guess Jordan was saying in some cases it already has come to represent that for some people, and that's good. But I think that we need to keep this in hand.
Well, that emergent, even just that it's already come to represent this. And now we're consciously articulating what's already here exemplifies the very thing we're talking about, right?
Right. And so to use your sort of Heideggerian way of thinking about it, where that in becoming more conscious of its aptness is a kind of Heideggerian authentication of its emergence.
Right.
To come aware of its light by which we are knowing this process.
Yes. We're hearing seeing the light that's already lit and then
Right.
bringing into language and responding and articulating what we're hearing.
Right.
Because I think
Right.
that there is that sense of which, was it Sean Kelly, who wrote a book with Dreyfus called
I've read it, All Things Shining.
yeah.
Yeah.
He's got like a 20-hour recording of his class on late Heidegger. It's really good. I really like it a lot.
Okay.
Actually, there's similarities between the two of you. It'd be interesting for you to hear this, but it's basically in the Dreyfus way of teaching, which is basically Dreyfus isn't trying to teach you anything. He's up there and he gets up there and he reads and he gets stumped and he's like, all right, what the hell is he talking about? Right? And then everyone's right. So he just lets learn, right? He goes up there and he learns in front of everybody and it just draws and gathers. This is like really messy, but exciting, deeply impactful way of teaching.
Right. And he espouses the humility.
Yeah. And he's super clumsy and like geeky and just awkward and unconscious of it.
In a very kind of classic professorial kind of way.
Totally. Sean's a lot more inherently composed and gathered, and articulate and poetic, but he really kind of does the same thing. He gets up there and he reads it, and he's going, "Okay, what the hell?" And you can literally see him start to come. And what I like about it is actually what I think Kelly was excavating out of later Heidegger, whereas like, okay, how do we respond to the event, right? What's the German word for that? Not Gestell, that's the opposite of it. But whatever that word is that means the event of unconcealment, right? Aletheia, it's Heidegger's way of speaking theologically, right? Like speaking being, but not through a metaphysics of some kind, right? Whatever that is.
Okay. Yeah.
And what he says is like, well, how do you cultivate? Like, how do you prepare for the coming of the event, right? Let's say, right? Well, when he gets down to it, it's like, well, you make yourself in a sense transparent or open to the ability to be open to be struck by that which is whispering that you couldn't hear unless you were open to be struck by in such a way that the hearing of which that calls you forth to speak it. And that sense of the order between, like, it matters, I think, between, like, there's a listening that you're hearing it so deeply that, like, that you hear it and then you articulate it, but then there's the hearing it, speaking it, hearing it, speaking it, to where they're like the same thing. Where listening and hearing or hearkening is still prior, right? Mm-hmm. But like, you're so open to it, you're so of it, you're so clearly listening into it that the hearkening of it is that which gives testimony to having heard it, right?
Yes.
That's the way that everything's going to change.
Right.
We're going to go to heaven.
Right.
Like that.
Right. Well, that's really good.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. I'm just letting that sink. Mm-hmm. I'm letting that sink. Beautifully put, Guy.
Yeah. You know what? I probably need to actually close this. I mean, we can get together tomorrow or Monday or something like that and go on and read.
It's all good. No, this is a great, like, we clearly felt the need to. This is clearly the path that we really wanted to go down. So I'm glad we did that. I'm glad we gave into the impulse of it.
Thank you, Socrates.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yep. Yep. Good stuff. Yeah, we can pick this up at any point. We could do it tomorrow. We could do it the next day. Either or, no problem.
Okay, cool. Great doing this with you. This is so much fun.
This was so fun.
I
Yeah,
like
it was.
to know you, and I like having you someone close to me in my life, and
I'm really grateful for that too. I was just thinking about this the other day, actually, Guy, that like it's only been like I don't know how long it's been. It really hasn't been that long at all that we've been sitting and having these discussions, and yet I feel like I know you very well, even though the time has been so brief. It's been so abundant.
Yeah.
That it's the time is really not an accurate way of measuring how it feels at all, and also I'm still like a novelty of the fact that like we're at such a distance, but we're still able to do this in the way that we are, and it feels anyway. It's just so cool, and I'm so grateful for it, and I'm grateful to have you like constantly around to talk to, both when we're actually talking and even when we're not talking. I'm talking to you. So.
Yeah. That sense.
I'm grateful. I'm grateful for your friendship, and just grateful for how rich it's become in such a short period of time.
Yeah, and even that sense of just like my nervous system. It's not even. It's like even my nervous system is like, oh yeah, he's a lifer, or it's like as if I've known you. You know, there's people that there's not a whole lot of formality that comes up. There's forming spontaneously, but not the sense of I'm getting to know you and I'm orienting. It's like I haven't really experienced much of that with you, and it's interesting to feel my nervous system just pre-reflectively respond to you that way, in just the way that you were talking about.
Yep. I have that exact same experience. It's a gift I will readily accept.
Right on. I'm impressed, especially given this traumatized human being over here. That this can evoke that is really great.
Oh my God, you evoke. I mean, you must know this. You're too humble to say so, but like you must know this about yourself, that you inspire a confidence and a level of sort of intimate disclosure in people that is so. I mean, obviously, right? So much of what you do is based on that gift of yours, which obviously I know it's a cultivated gift in addition to just being an innate one. But like, dude, you do it. You like, it's remarkable. See, I'm struggling even to find words for it. It's remarkable. It's just remarkable, and it's inspiring, and that's what's made it so easy.
Yeah, totally. I have a feeling this is at the center. I think this is, and we haven't gotten to this part with Plato, but like, just have a feeling when he spoke in our last one, when he referred to friendship as a god. I feel on some level there's some feeling I have that like a lot of these digital campfires, right? These dialogoses that are enacting, that on some level I feel in some very profound but like super simple way has something to do with a very deep notion of friendship.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
But not like, it's funny, it's like not like friendship that is the result of some process, but more like some friendship or way of being or comporting that friendship is just present. That's what I think I meant by like the sense of intimacy with you, is as if I've known you for a long time, right? It's like what would normally take going through a process with somebody, right? Getting to know them. I think it's on some level, I would imagine, because on some level, as John really pointed out one point, like one of the things he says is like, it's nice having peers.
Yeah.
In the literal sense of the word, right? Yeah, like that we're peering, on some level, we're peering at the same madness.
Yeah.
Right.
We co-aspire, as he puts
it, kind of a love that gets evoked, and the affinity to share that is just unbelievable.
Totally. And no amount of time is sufficient to foster that if the if the intrinsic natures of those people, that just the spontaneous chemistry that you cannot calculate or premeditate, if that's not there, no amount of time can create that. I was just, as you were saying, I was thinking, like, I mean, I feel I know you and am more known by you now after such a short period of time than I feel about people who I've known for years and years and years. Yeah. And people who I do care about and I value and are important to me, but that there's not that, so we're not looking at the same things and we're not looking in the same direction.
Yeah.
In the way that we are, you and I are, and you know, we are with John and so on. And you can't, that's not reducible to any amount of time. It's not reducible to anything concrete. It just emerges or it doesn't. And that's what I mean by saying it's a gift. It's like, it's and the God of friendship, you're right. Thinking about it as like a spirit is a good way of thinking about it for that reason.
Yeah.
Spirit descends on the relationship or it doesn't, you know? And
I guess because of what we're peering at ultimately is timeless.
Yes.
Like we're oriented towards timeless. I guess that quickens things.
It sure does.
Right?
It sure does. Yeah, because it lifts you out of the bound, like it lifts us out of time altogether. And so the passage of time becomes like irrelevant.
Interesting.
It just, it's the vertical, like it's opens up to the vertical, right?
Yeah.
And
totally.
and that, I mean, that's happened from the very beginning here, which I'm so grateful for. Yeah.
Great being infinite with you.
Likewise, my friend.
Much love, my friend.
So much.
So I'll text you and we'll schedule the next one to get the Plato again. Okay.
Sounds great.
Bye.
Okay. See you soon.